There's a large stigma around mental health in all communities, and particularly in communities of color and African American communities. Most people still go to their religious leader before they go to doctors, sometimes because they still don't trust medical establishments. There are all types of mottos in Black religious teachings that suggest that mental health challenges are different than any other kind of physical challenges, and we should be able to get over it by ourselves, when no one thinks they'll just get over diabetes or heart disease by themselves. We do such a good job of being community for each other and lifting each other up. And if religious leaders were better trained in addressing mental health challenges and talking about self-care, maybe more Black people would feel safe talking about it.
Good evening. Thank you for joining me today on Real Talk with Jean Price. We have a great show planned for you. We're going to be talking about a very hard topic, but yet necessary topic. We're going to be talking about struggling with mental health in the church. In 1949, the United States even observed Mental Health Day because so many people were struggling. But there's such a stigma in dealing with mental health, but yet there's not a stigma when you're dealing with regular physical problems. So tonight, or today rather, we are going to go a little deeper. We're going to go a little further in trying to understand how do we deal with the struggle of mental health in the church. I'm so excited to welcome my guest tonight, Pastor Robert Farah, who is a Christian counselor. He is a life coach, and he's going to help us to understand a little better what's going on with mental health in the church. Thank you for joining me tonight, Pastor. We're having a little technical difficulty, but Pastor's going to chime in. In the meantime, what we're going to do, I just want to give you a little history. Lifeway research studies show there are 13 statistics in dealing with mental health in the church. Some pastors even didn't even realize that they were even going through mental health as well as their congregations. Especially in a day like today, dealing with COVID, so many people are struggling and so many people are suffering, trying to navigate themselves through it. But many people going through depression, anxiety, panic attacks that people never even had before. What do we do in our communities? What do we do in our churches? What do we do to help ourselves get through all of that? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about it from a professional perspective. as well from a Christian perspective, because we do know that God is in all things, but yet there are some times where people really need someone to talk to about how to get through these things. So we are so grateful for our guest that is going to be with us tonight, who's going to help us share some of those principles and understand it. We're going to talk about training that needs to go on in some of our churches. How do we recognize the signs? How do we know that somebody's struggling? What kind of resources are out there to help people really get through it? That's some of the things. And we want you to put your questions in the chat. We want you to chime in on our conversations. So we are so excited and delighted to have with us Pastor Robert Farah, who's going to help us navigate our way through this. Thank you for joining me tonight on Real Talk.
Hey, Pastor, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you again for joining us. We're so excited to talk about this issue because it is such a serious thing that people are going through. First, if you can kind of tell us a little bit about your organizations, just kind of navigate us through a little bit about how did you get started?
Well, I'm a pastor, Christian counselor, and life coach. And what really, I would say, thrust me into the work of counseling is what we call somewhat of a tragedy that we went through some years ago in 2010. I lost my 2-year-old son to a rare genetic disease, and it was very, very trying time, a very traumatic time. And through all of that pain and suffering and mental anguish, I was called on God to enter into the area of counseling. And then that's when I enrolled in college to start working in the direction of what I do now as a Christian counselor and life coach.
Wow. Wow. Well, again, we're so sorry that you and your wife had to go through that. But God knows how to take tragedy and turn it into triumph. And we're grateful that you can be the voice to help navigate, as I was saying earlier, through some of these things. With Christian counseling, Pastor, help us understand, why is there such a stigma when it comes to mental health? But then when it comes to physical health, like diabetes or heart disease, those things that really can damage us physically, why and mentally is there such a stigma?
There's a few reasons for that. A lot of people, they feel almost insulted if they're characterized as someone that has a mental health issue. So they kind of look at it with the wrong eyes. Their perspective of mental health has been kind of misinformed. So once people understand that mental health is just as important as your physical health, in fact, a lot of things you do to improve physical health can also help improve some of your mental health. So you're exercising, to getting the right amount of sleep, doing certain things physically contribute to your mental health as well. So when people find that it's all just as important, and that, knowing when you're feeling overwhelmed, knowing when you're taking on too much, realizing if you're being consumed by something that's affecting you mentally. Once you know these things, you can start making the proper steps towards healing of your mental health and also your emotional health as well.
Yeah. Pastor, we were talking backstage about COVID a little bit. And as we were talking, I was sharing how when so many people have been talking about anxiety and panic attacks and just that uncertainty in dealing with such this disease, how do we help people with that?
Well, I always encourage what I call emotional support. That's someone that's there to really help them navigate through those feelings that they're having, because people don't understand that it's actually normal after going through something traumatic to almost feel like you're not safe. Like you start feeling some new insecurities. You start feeling exposed. You start feeling vulnerable because something that happened that you didn't expect. And now you're like, what's the next thing? What else can happen? Like, what else can happen? So that's a normal feeling, but it's how do I deal with those feelings? How do I manage those feelings? How do I navigate through this season of my life where I am feeling overwhelmed, or I am feeling afraid, or I am feeling vulnerable? And knowing how to do that is going to be very key. And that's what I teach a lot of times about, when I talk about stress management, I talk about what do you need to do on a consistent basis to make sure emotionally and mentally that you're safe. And if something happens, if a crisis happens, so it won't overtake you. So it's things that you need to do so you can be in that position.
So, Pastor, saying that, would the same thing apply to children? Only because, with school and, there was so much uncertainty with children going back to school, then they're hybrid, then they're on, then they're off. Would children suffer through those same kinds of, I guess, emotional acts or feelings? Would that also affect children?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Kids are very much affected. And that's why it's so important to get connected with a trained professional, because sometimes when children are going through stress, they don't know how to express that.
Mhm.
So they won't be able to communicate to you that I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, I'm having a difficult time adjusting. You would have to know it. You would have to assess it by their behavior, by how they talk. Are they eating less? Are they sleeping less? Or they seem to be a little bit more, having more behavioral problems, or they stop doing their chores. Like, there's different ways that you can tell that a child is under stress and not able to communicate that they're under stress.
What are some of those symptoms that people will look out for with children?
Well, for one, you start noticing changes. So if they were routinely acting a certain way or talking a certain way, or, if you notice some major changes in their behavior,
Okay.
like I said, if they start eating less,
Right.
they start sleeping less,
Yeah.
they start, being more defiant. Sometimes people say, well, why are you acting like this? Why are you being so, difficult? Well, it could be they're dealing with a lot of stress, and that's how they're kind of like expressing that. So you got to kind of look out for those signs. It doesn't always mean that's the reason for it, but if you see a pattern, you have to really pay attention and say, maybe my child is stressed out. Maybe they're overwhelmed.
Right. Oftentimes, and we both notice in church, people or anybody, you don't wear on your face that you're struggling. You don't wear depression. You can't see depression in a sense. It's not written in your forehead. But even in church, when people come in, sometimes we can see people going through. You can discern it. And it's what do you do from that perspective? In somebody in church, you're discerning there's something going on. We pray for them, but how do we take it further? We know prayer is the answer. We do know that. But how do we take it further from that perspective?
Well, I think you have to be really intentional. A lot of people, they don't have balance in their lives. I believe in the power of the Holy Ghost. I believe in prayer. But, sometimes we spiritualize everything. And some things are going to take some strategic action so that we can be able to move toward mental and emotional healing. And that may mean a conversation. You'll be surprised how many people are hungry and thirsty to have a conversation with someone that gives them their undivided attention. That is so rare, to sit down with a person for 30 minutes to an hour and they're giving you their undivided attention. That by itself is extremely therapeutic. So when they're able to really express how they're feeling, express their emotions and what's going through their minds, that by itself is therapeutic. And many cases, especially clients that I see, they find the answers to their issue on their own.
Okay.
They just needed somebody to talk to, and they started to kind of see, when you start asking the right questions and you start noticing certain things, they start finding the answers that they were looking for.
Sure. Because you could have somebody that's a worship leader, or let's be honest, you could be a pastor, but yet on the outside, you're looking and they seem fine. People seem fine. Or we've heard stories where a leader or somebody seems fine, but then they just committed suicide.
Right.
It's hard to understand that. And that's what I think why I'm glad this show was so important tonight, because how do we recognize the signs? And not all signs mean that, but it's apparent that that's what's going on in, let's be honest, right? In some churches. And also, what about in our culture? What about our communities? How do we, as a Black culture, make a change and help people get through that? We can't shout through everything.
That's right. That's true. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think, what I think? I feel like now, and my church that I pastor, I feel like I have a mandate for families especially. And one of the main things that I teach on a lot is communication. I think that communication is a big, huge asset. to any group, family, organization, or institution. If you have a culture of communication, if you create a culture where people feel comfortable communicating and talking about how they're feeling, they don't feel like they can't say certain things or they can't speak on certain things. Once you create that kind of a culture, then a person can say to you, I'm not feeling okay today. Or they could say to you that I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Most cases, and this is sad, but most cases in leadership, people are consumed by what they do. They're consumed by what they do. So they don't give themselves room for self-care. So what happens is you start to put unrealistic expectations on yourself, and other people do the same thing. And it's a lose situation. You're never going to win.
Yeah. Wow. Tiara chimed in and she said, this is very interesting. She wrote, hidden pain under the smile. But isn't that true? And thank you, Tiara. That's what our pastor and I are saying tonight, that behind that smile, behind that, praise the Lord, how are you? Behind that, somebody's really going through. But yet, do you think that sometimes, Pastor, that it's the shame of somebody struggling mentally? They don't want anybody to know that they're struggling. Why is shame such a part of that?
I think there's many reasons for that. A lot of people already have in their mind that people want them to fail. Okay. They already have in their minds that they have so many people waiting for their demise. So they don't want to give them that satisfaction that I'm having a problem today. I'm struggling today. I'm feeling overwhelmed today. So they rather keep that to themselves and try to deal with it alone rather than express the fact that, you know what, this is too much for me. And I think you just need a safe place. You know what I mean? To be able to talk about those issues. You need a safe place where you can say, how do I cope with this? How do I deal with how I'm feeling at this moment? So before I can make it to the next day. And I think that's a big part of it. And I also think, like you said, there is a culture around mental health where people feel like they don't want to be called crazy or called you know what I mean? They got these names that they call you and they don't want to be called that. They don't want to be looked at as a victim. You know what I mean? They don't want to have that victim mentality. So it's different things that go through your mind. So like I said, if you create a culture of communication, if you have a safe place that you can talk to somebody, then I think those things are so crucial. People don't know how important that is. Like you have to get it out. You could be in a room full of people and feel like you're all alone. You know what I mean? It happens every day in church. People are suffering in silence and they're sitting in the benches and they're pondering these different thoughts and hurtful things that they've been through. And they can't dare say anything. So it's like you just deal with it to the point where it just gets too much for you to deal with.
Yeah. Natasha chimed in, Pastor, and this is very interesting. She wrote, definitely talking about shame. She said, because Jesus is supposed to be the answer to all things. Sometimes when you speak up, you're looked at, as not having faith or trust.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Because that's a good point. Thank you, Natasha, for that, because that's very interesting. Sometimes it is looked at as you don't have the faith to believe. You're not trusting in God. But people are really, it's almost like a person that has anguish to you. And I'm glad you said that before, Pastor. It's anguish mentally. When I came through, most people know my background. I was abused as a child. And I remember coming into the church and I had no one to talk to about it, to your point, Pastor, that you mentioned tonight. But I agree with Natasha. I remember feeling like people are going to think that I don't trust God. And this is years ago, because of what I'm going through. But I never had anybody to help me to navigate through it. How do we people understand that it's not about not having faith? It's an injury that has taken place. It's something that has happened to cause us to have that. So how do we deal with that, though? Because
one of the things I think is so helpful in our training about psychological first aid is helping people to understand that certain emotions are normal. That it's normal to feel a certain way at a certain moment. That's no indictment against your faith, but we all have moments. And when we're having our moment, that's when we need support the most. That's what we need emotional support the most, is when we're having a moment. Everybody has a moment. Some people have moments longer than others, but we all have moments. So when we're having our moment, how do you deal with me when I'm having my moment? What kind of emotional support can I get while I'm having my moment? Has your perspective of me changed because I had a moment? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes,
you got to
that's
be able
important.
to,
Yes, yes.
yeah, to be bold about that. You know what? I had a moment. Like, I talked about this a couple of months ago. I lost my father last year, and I didn't cry at his funeral. For some reason, I don't know why. I didn't really cry at his funeral. Maybe a little bit, not much. But one
Right.
day, a few months later, I just broke down out of nowhere. It just came out. I just started having a moment, and I kind of shared that moment, and it was amazing how people, could identify with just having that kind of like delayed response to a
Right.
situation, or going through some sort of a trauma and not really it hitting you in the moment. Sometimes it's adrenaline, or just that moment where you got to get through this, so you don't even think about it. But then
Right.
when everything is wind down, then it really hits you. So I think if we normalize that and make people understand that this is normal, I think it'll be more accepted, and then people can really get to a place of healing, much better.
So let me ask you a question, Pastor, from a professional standpoint. Is it sometimes that it's really, say, use me as an example. If I was going through something and I'm, to your point, I'm having that moment, is it so much, is it maybe the other person that's really having a struggle with your moment than you yourself having a struggle with your moment? Because maybe people feel they can't handle it, or maybe people think like, it's something else. Because sometimes I'm finding that people may not can go through with you. Sometimes we may think everybody can, but maybe everybody can't go through with you when you're having that moment. So what do you do
Right.
in a case like that? Because now you're out there, you shared what you've gone through, but the person can't help you get through it. But then I know for myself, I would feel like it almost made me feel like, and I think Tiara was talking about it, like I need to go into seclusion. You know what I'm saying? I
Right.
said it, the person can't really identify. So now it makes me feel even more ashamed. What does that person do that feels that shame now on top of that? Because I've been there.
Right, right.
Been
That's
there.
the key thing. That's a big deal, because
Yeah.
people can be, and I see this all the time. People
Mhm.
can be so insensitive and not know it.
Okay. Right.
Very
Right.
insensitive and not realize how insensitive they're being. So I think discernment factor is big, but it's only certain people that's anointed to kind of
Good.
be there for you in those moments. I dealt with a young lady who had lost her mom, and she said so many people kept asking her, what did her mother pass from?
Mm.
And she said that was so insensitive to ask the question, what took the life of her mother? Like, they didn't realize how asking that question was
Right.
doing so much damage to her emotionally. She would cringe. It made her want to just isolate, like you said, because people asking that is so insensitive. So I think you have to be very careful about, God, who is it that you want to connect me with in this season of my life, or in this stage that I'm in? There's a person that understands. There's a person that can walk with me through this. When I went through the loss of my child, it was certain people that God helped me to connect with, that I could understand. So
Okay.
I understood what it was like to be tired, not just physically, but
Mm.
tired emotionally, tired mentally, tired, in so many different ways. I understood that. I understood what it was like to feel like that uncertainty. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I feel helpless. If I could change it, I would. Those feelings, everybody doesn't understand those feelings. So it takes a special person to be able to be there for you during that time. And I tell people all the time, one of the greatest things you can do with a person when you don't know what to say is don't say anything. Just say, I'm here. You know what I mean? I'm here for you. Just so they know that you're with them and you're for them and you're there with them. That alone is enough. You know what I mean? If you want to have a moment and just cry or just
Mhm.
scream, whatever you want to do, I'm here. And I think that's going to be very, 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 very key.
Yeah. I think what's beautiful about what you just said, that was such a beautiful analogy about sometimes just being there, just being able to just, let that person have that moment. And what came to mind, Pastor, when you were talking is that's what Christ does with us. We can go to him boldly. We have access. And yet he allows us, oh my, to have that moment of just letting it go. And you could feel the
Right.
presence and the love of God in that moment. You know what I'm saying? So I'm so
Right.
grateful
Right.
that you said that. And if we can take that, apply it, and then give that back, I agree with
Right.
you. That really would make a world of difference in trying to help somebody navigate. Because sometimes they don't want you to say anything. They just
Right.
want to know that, you know what, I'm there. They just
Yeah,
want to,
that's it.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? One of the questions I have too, Pastor, we're going to take a commercial break, but I want to go, this is so good. Let me just say this to the people that are watching tonight. Pastor Rob is really giving us some great tools on dealing with how people are struggling in the church, and just some good stuff. And Shalana chimed in tonight, and she just said this is so true. But when we come back, I want to talk about PTSD. And the reason I want to talk about that, because you could be functioning, but you can have it, and yet you're in church.
Mhm.
And the reason I can say that,
Yeah,
Pastor Rob,
that's right.
talk about it, because I did. You know what I'm saying? I was functioning,
Right, right.
but I
Yep.
literally had mental
Uh-huh.
trauma. And I'm functioning. I'm
Yep.
a wife.
Mhm.
I'm a mother of three, and yet
Mhm.
that trauma, all of that,
Mhm.
it right, Tiara, you're literally functioning, and yet,
Mhm.
Pastor, it was sitting
Right.
right here. I can remember times going to work. You know, I worked at Winthrop Hospital for 20-something years, and just cry this moment. Then the next moment, I'm
Mhm.
laughing, or whatever the case may
Mhm.
be. And I want to talk about that because one of the things is so important, and I'm glad they wrote in the chat. Do you believe you can truly be yourself in public? And I couldn't do that
Wow.
because I was
Right.
afraid I was going to be judged. But we're going to come
Mhm.
back. I know I gave you a lot right there. I
That's
know I
so
did.
true. That's good. That's good.
I gave you a lot. I know that. But audience, listen, you have time to tell people to chime in, put like. We want you to write something in the chat. We are coming back. This is such a great topic to talk about, because yet most of us are all saved, but we
Mhm.
understand that sometimes
Mhm.
we need a little help. We'll be right back with
Yep.
Pastor Robert. Stay tuned with Real Talk.
Right.
There's a large stigma around mental health in all communities, and particularly in communities of color and African American communities. Most people still go to their religious leader before they go to doctors, sometimes because they still don't trust medical establishments. There are all types of mottos in Black religious teachings that suggest that mental health challenges are different than any other kind of physical challenges, and we should be able to get over it by ourselves, when no one thinks they'll just get over diabetes or heart disease by themselves. We do such a good job of being community for each other and lifting each other up. And if religious leaders were better trained in addressing mental health challenges and talking about self-care, maybe more Black people would feel safe talking about it.
Have you been enjoying the show? Make sure you comment and like. Tell us what you want to talk about. It might be featured on the next Real Talk with Jean Price. Well, I can't believe it's been 2 months since we've started Real Talk with Jean Price, and I'm so grateful for your love and your support in helping us get through this small time. So much has happened, so many wonderful things, and I'm grateful. I'm doing well. The Lord is still touching my body. Every checkup that I go to, it's been amazing. So it's been a journey, but can I tell you something? I'm learning in this season not to call it a journey, right? What I'm doing actually is calling it a road. And the reason I call it a road is because when I think about when the Bible says in Luke chapter number 24, the story of a road to Emmaus was about two men. One was unnamed and one was Cleopas. And the Bible goes on to talk about how they were discussing about something that happened in their life. And they were kind of distraught and they were a little discouraged. That's how I was. But the beautiful part about that story is that Jesus came and he was talking with them. And one of the key points in the story that got my attention was he said to them, well, what things were you discussing? And I love the Lord because God goes right to the heart of the matter. And God went to the heart of the matter in my life. And I like to call this a necessary road because hadn't I gone through what I went through in February, I wouldn't be sitting here feeling like I'm feeling right now. I'm just so grateful tonight that doors have opened and many things have happened to have Real Talk with Jean Price where it is today. So I wanted to take this time to come back on and let you know, listen, I'm checking in and I'm doing well. Thank you again for all your support. Thank you very much. Welcome back to Real Talk. Oh, we are having a great discussion tonight with my wonderful guests. We are talking about struggling with mental health in the church. My guest, Pastor Robert Ferrer, has been enlightening us, sharing with us, giving us some great insight. Audience has been chiming in. This is a very heavy topic, but necessary topic. Welcome back, Pastor Robert, for joining us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm having a wonderful time.
You're welcome, sir. I want to go back to before the commercial break. I kind of gave you like something I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to deal with how do people deal with PTSD, but yet you're still functioning. How do people deal with
that? I think you get into a place of denial at some point and not really acknowledge that you're having an issue and your need to perform, your need to get the job done, your need to accomplish things causes you to put that other stuff on the back burner and just continue to move, but you're not okay. And if somebody asks you, are you okay? You'll say, yes, I'm okay, but you're not really okay.
Right. It's really true. So sometimes, Pastor, it's so easy, right? To fix things, to fix other people. When I say fix, mean help other people. Why can't we do it for ourselves? For those that are struggling with mental, I don't want to call it disease because I don't mean it like that, but people that are struggling with different things, whether it be emotionally or whatever, how come it's easier to fix others, but it's hard to fix you? Not meaning you, but like us. Why is it so hard?
You know, I think it's like a part of our DNA when we're servers and we always willing to help other people. We really deal with the topic of compassion fatigue, where people are always serving to the point where they just pour out everything that they have and they don't get anything back. So they get accustomed to being the one that's always giving, the one that's always doing, the one that's always being there for everybody else. And they have conditioned themselves to not expect anything for anybody else, to not expect for anything to happen for them. So that's a way, that's more like a defense mechanism on one hand, because they don't want to get disappointed. But on the other hand, it's not healthy because it's no balance. It's like you're giving out and nothing's coming back. So you're ending up empty and burnt out, and you end up with compassion fatigue. So what you have to do is you have to make self-care a part of your life. You have to be intentional about making self-care a part of your life and not feel like you're being selfish because you're implementing self-care, because that's something that has to be a part of everybody's life. So you have to know when to turn it off, you know, when to do something that you enjoy, when to say no. When to say, I can't this time. You know, knowing how to do that is going to help you emotionally, mentally, physically. And it's going to create a standard for the people in your life to understand that this can't be a one-way street.
Right.
Exactly.
It has
to be a two-way thing for us. And I think it's going to be healthy altogether for the relationship as a whole. See, I do an anger management class.
Okay.
Of the people that I work with, they're not just irate people that just want to do crazy things. They have found themselves at some point being passive and allowing things to go on for over and over again until it builds up, and then you finally explode. You lose it, you black out, you almost forget about what you just did, And it was happening over time because you kept letting things go. You kept not being assertive. You kept not speaking up. And you started feeling not only angry with the people who did you wrong, but you're angry with yourself.
Yes. That's
allowing it.
Yes.
So that frustration is too much for the human body to take. The stress is unbearable.
You know, it's amazing that we weren't made to carry all these loads,
Right.
and somehow or another, right? We feel
Right.
like we can. And I like what you said about the exploding, because there are times too that you can implode as well as explode, you know? But I want to go back. You said something that was good. You talked about self-care, and sometimes in self-care, you have to be selfish. Is it hard for people to adapt to I guess you talked about balance, to you, the person changing? I think on the other side, sometimes it makes people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it does. On the other side, they start feeling like, what happened? They start noticing the change. But then the person who's actually doing all the work, they have allowed that role to be their identity. So they become this person that everybody has to come to, this person that almost is not human, you know, the hero, the one that's always saving everybody, but who saved them. And so they have even a difficult time letting go of that role, that you can still help people and not be everybody's savior. You can help people and not be above and beyond the call of duty. You can help people and say no sometimes, you know what I mean? And it's okay. I've had couples who, you know, dealt with substance abuse in the family, and they were so used to being there for that person that was suffering from substance abuse that when the person finally got clean, they were like, "What's my job now?"
It's
Like, you don't need me anymore. now you don't need me no more. That was making me feel needed. So it's a healthy way of having balance, you know, helping other people, knowing when to say no, and making sure you have self-care as a part of your everyday life.
Wow, that is absolutely true. And it's almost like when you go and you give your life to God, people are so used to you being one kind of way, and when you change or when you accept Christ, it's almost like you did something wrong. And it's so interesting. When you try to make things in your life positive, people sometimes are used to you flowing in the negative way.
Right.
Sometimes you're used to that. You know, Tiara chimed in and she said, you don't want to become unhealthy yourself. And I like what Sherelle said. She said that whatever part of the topic we were talking, she said that used to be her. And I like the transparency that everybody's chiming in tonight, because sometimes you really just want to just say, this is what I'm going through and I need help. Because you can't keep carrying, right, Pastor Robert? You can't keep carrying all the weights. We're not made to carry the weights. That's so important. I want to go a little deeper and talk about, I know I'm sticking with the self-care because you know why? Because that's the one thing that we still don't do. I found with some people in counseling people that they'll start going in that direction, but then somehow or another they'll revert back. Do you think fear plays a factor when it's really you're trying to push them to normalcy, if I can use that? And when it becomes a little uncomfortable, it's easier to go back to what's really abnormal because they're comfortable. Stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because it's not normal, but it's comfortable.
Right. That's absolutely many cases, because that people always gravitate to the familiar. Whether it's dysfunctional or not, you gravitate to what you're familiar with. So I'll give you a perfect example. A person who, before they accepted Christ, they were very aggressive, and most people knew not to mess with them. Now, when they accept Christ, they have given their life over to Christ. They kind of tone it down, but because they tone it down, people take advantage. So now they're like, I got to go back to I was aggressive because they didn't try me like this before. So I think it's a balance, but it's definitely something that you have to be, again, intentional about. You may need some help with kind of navigating with those feelings and knowing, you know, when to go, when not to go, when to kind of back up and not go all the way back, you know, knowing how to gauge it. And
Mhm.
once you're able to do that, once you master that, then
Mm.
you can implement balance in your overall life and you're a happier individual. A lot of frustrations and aggravations that people are dealing with, some people walking around waiting to explode, is because they don't have that
Yeah.
balance and they don't know how to deal with these feelings. All they know is that I'm feeling on edge, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling like I'm close to burning out. But
Mm.
in their minds, I have no other options. You know,
Mm.
I have to do this. So it's like I'm stuck in this thing where it's like almost like you're trapped. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to be here, but I know
Mhm.
that I can't do this. So unless you find a balance, it's always going to be an issue for you. So I think with that, getting that help to kind of
Mhm.
learning,
Mhm.
how do I implement balance? How do I deal with my emotions? How do I stay kind of leveled? You know what I
Yes.
mean? You want to be leveled.
Yes.
And when you ask yourself that questions, that's where I kind of put some action steps,
Mhm. Mhm.
journaling, monitoring your feelings, seeing
Yeah.
how you're going, if you're making progress or not. And then you can start making some changes of some adjustments that's going to help you.
Mhm. That's good. That's excellent. Pastor, when I came out of, I like to call it the shell. When you're abused as a child,
Mhm.
sexually and physically, one of the hardest things for me was the fact that I was forced to be quiet.
Wow.
It was silence was the underpinning of everything. And to your point, being able to come out and know that I had a voice, and that
Right.
was one of the traps of the perpetrator, was making me understand I did not have a voice. But
Right.
I'm so glad you talked about that. And people were chiming in. Shalana said, "Oh Lord, you are in my life." So Pastor, you're talking in my life for sure. And one of the things that was hard for me was understanding that it was okay to speak. And I'm glad you talked about that, because when I came out to speak, I came out to speak.
Right.
Like to your point, you come out with anger. I came out with frustration. I came out, and trying to find that balance was
Right.
so difficult. But I
Yeah.
thank God for the Holy Ghost, because that's what
Hallelujah.
helped me. But it was so difficult. And I hope everyone is listening, that what Pastor is saying is so true. Finding that balance really begins to shape your life. And then you understand that temperance comes in, and you
Right.
begin to apply the word of God, and different things like that. So thank you so much for talking about that. What are some of the things from a training perspective? You're talking to us, we're
Mhm.
in the church. How do we help? Is there resources we can go to help? How do we help our people?
I think it's a few resources out there, and I'm going to share something with you towards the end of the show, because there's a free resource for emotional support and also to help give tools for stress management and coping strategies and self-care tips. But I think what you mentioned earlier about not having a voice, and I think that's a big deal, especially when I deal with the African American community and females, especially. I've had that with a lot of my clients where when you take a person's voice away from them, you're saying to them what you have to say doesn't matter,
Yes.
that what your opinion is insignificant, that what you feel doesn't mean anything. It's not valuable. And knowing those type of feelings are so damaging to you emotionally and mentally. You have to know that what you have to say matters. You have to know that your voice is needed. You have to know that you are significant, you are valuable, that how you feel matters. So when you start to when that's taken away from you,
Mhm.
it affects you in so many different ways. It even changes how you think. Your
Yeah.
perspective changes. Your ability to have relationships change. Your ability to communicate change. So once you get to grips with the fact that I do matter, that
Mhm.
I was made in the image of God, right?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was fearfully and wonderfully made. He knew me even before I was in my mother's womb. So I do matter. What I have to say matters. And the thoughts that come to my mind, me sharing those thoughts are important to me,
Mhm.
and it needs to be possible for me. So when you start to gain that confidence,
Mhm.
it has such a huge dramatic change on your life as a whole.
Yes.
And you start to see things in your behavior, you start to see things in your pursuits, things that you start to do, even for your career, your business, your ministry.
Right.
Once you get that emotional foundation,
Mhm.
you're able to move forward in your life and accomplish the goals that God has set for you and be who He created you to be. See, when people damage those areas, they're damaging your life as a whole.
Wow. Wow. That was a lot. And that was good. Like that really was, because that's exactly what happens to most people. I mean, some people may not have had to go through traumatic things, but to a point, Pastor, that's what happens. People sometimes feel like they don't have that voice
Right,
to say what they feel, or they're made to feel like what they have to say is not important. And
right.
know that you brought that peace in to say, no, we're
Uh-huh.
made in the image and the likeness of Christ. You have that voice where you can definitely speak and be able to say what you need to say. So
Right.
go back to the resources.
Mhm.
Are there any type of programs, other some things where people can go? And I
Mhm.
know COVID is all over the place, and maybe a lot of things might not be open. But
Mhm.
somebody listening tonight to you, Pastor, either know somebody or themselves that
Mhm.
needs assistance in dealing with things that are emotionally and mentally going on.
Mhm.
What are they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would love to tell you about a program that I'm a crisis counselor for, and it's called Project Hope. So there's a website, NY is right on the screen, nyprojecthope.org, and people can go to that website and get information about how do I speak to a crisis counselor when I need emotional support? How do I speak to someone when I need services that I might not know about? This program helps people in a tremendous way. And a great thing about this program is not only is it free, but it's confidential and anonymous. So you don't even have to tell them your name.
Mhm.
They when we're logging in people's information, we might write initials down and write that we spoke to a person about this topic, but you don't have to say your name. You don't have to you don't have to worry about your information being put out there. It's confidential, anonymous, and it's free. And it's funded by FEMA, and people can go to the website and check it out. Now, if they live in Orange County,
Mhm.
there's a direct line that they can call if they live in Orange County. But if they're anywhere else in New York, they can just go to the website. And the great thing about the website also is it gives you some great tips for stress management, tips on self-care, how to take care of yourself emotionally and mentally, kind of conditioning. I really believe prevention is better than cure. So if you can do some things early on to kind of condition yourself to deal with the stresses of life, then you kind of ahead of the game. And I think if you kind of implement those things to your life, you definitely will see a change. So people can check that out, and it's a great resource.
Wow. Pastor, you said prevention is better than cure.
Uh-huh.
That said a lot. You could prevent something instead of waiting and knowing that you need a cure for something.
Right,
There
right.
is a big difference. That is a big difference. Can you go a little deeper, Pastor, on the prevention side of it?
Mhm.
They just put it in the chat, myprojecthope.org. On the prevention side, if somebody can't get to those resources, are there any other resources or any phone numbers that people can call? Because people really do want to get the help. That is a great one, the Project Hope. But are there any other resources that they can reach out to or call or?
Well, I have my own private practice. There's a course they could go to my website also and book me
Okay.
for a one-on-one session. I do couples, I do one-on-one, I do families, I do groups. I'm actually doing right now with a church that started an outreach ministry for grief recovery, so that the members that lost loved ones,
Right.
they can come on in and get be a part of that group. I don't have the information for that, but I can send that to you. And it's a group where people get to kind of like a support group, and you go through the 5 stages of grief and get an understanding of how you may be feeling, how you're dealing with it, where you are mentally and emotionally. So those type of things are very helpful. And I think when you want your mental health to be where it needs to be, you have to really be intentional about getting the services you need to keep yourself, intact. You don't ignore that, because eventually it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah. Pastor, I wanted to talk about that. I'm glad you brought it up about the grief. Of course,
Mhm,
we know there's so much going on with COVID, right? And so many people have lost loved ones.
mhm.
How do people navigate through the grief process? Because that doesn't that add on to emotional imbalances and things. How do people deal with that?
Well, it's so many different things that I feel are helpful. But
Oh,
one of the things that I feel is really helpful is if they can somehow become a part of a support group
okay.
of other people that are grieving. If the right person is facilitating it, you get to kind of, I would say, process your feelings.
Okay.
Everybody deals with things differently. And it also depends on, and we just gained this information recently where people didn't realize how much your grief process is different depending on how you lost a loved one. Sometimes you can lose someone to something just sudden or traumatic or like COVID or something like that, as opposed to losing someone who may have been sick for a period of time, and you kind of prepare your mind. But it's different ways that you deal with grief. But when you lose someone a certain way, it's going to affect the way you grieve.
Okay.
You got to know that. If you don't know that, then you're thinking there's something wrong with you. You're thinking that, you're having an issue that can't be resolved. A whole bunch of things go through your mind. So there's a lot of different components relating to grief that people need to know. So when you get into a grief recovery group, your goal is to come to a place, not that your life will ever be the same, because you have to embrace a new normal, but you come to a place where you're on the healing process.
Right.
It's a day-by-day thing. When you lose a loved one, your life is never the same. You'll never get over that. But you can continue to live a fulfilled life despite of your grief. And learning how to do that is going to be crucial.
Wow. So, Pastor, would you say that helps in the coping mechanism of grief, having those support groups?
Yeah, that really helps. That's a big, huge help. Is to be a part of a support group, for sure.
That is awesome. That is really awesome. Pastor, people are chiming in still. This is such a great topic. Oh my goodness. It's so many questions that I have that are running through my mind. And listen, guys, we have a few more minutes. If you have a question for Pastor Robert, put it in the chat. Ask him, if there's more resources that you need. This has been such a wealth of knowledge that can literally speak to somebody on Real Talk that has been there when it's dealing with grief and different things, and a professional at it that understands the spiritual as well as the natural. And I think that's the two that you bring, the spiritual and the natural together, really makes a difference. We have a few more minutes, Pastor. Somebody is listening to the show tonight, but what you're doing, what your wife is doing, what God is giving you guys, what would you say to them tonight? They're struggling, they're in the church, but they need help. Look at the camera and just give them some hope. Thank you.
Absolutely. So for you that are going through a struggle mentally or emotionally, I want to encourage you and let you know that there is hope. Yes. Don't ever think that what you're going through is too much, that you're not going to make it, that you can't deal with this, that it's just no use of even thinking that anything will ever be different than how you feel right now. But I want to let you know that there is hope, and that God still sees you. He still knows you. And even through your suffering, he has not forgotten about you. So there's somebody that God has anointed. There's a thing or a situation or some way that God is going to minister to you. He's the God of comfort. Yes. And there's still something for you, even in this last hour. I tell people after the loss of my son, I always say, if I had to go through that kind of pain, something good has to come out of this. I want you to feel the same way, that whatever you're going through, whatever you're dealing with, the pain that you're going through, you have to make up in your mind that it's not going to end like this. Something good has to come out of this, right? Something good has to come out. I'm going to make sure that I am instrumental in seeing that happen. So I want you to make sure that you become intentional and go and do whatever you need to do for your own mental and emotional health, and watch God work in your life. Watch God deliver, heal, and strengthen you through your tragedy. And there's somebody else that God's going to cause you to meet that's going to need to hear from you from experience because of what you've been through. So it's not a loss. It's not over. There's still hope. God is still able. And I want to encourage you to keep moving forward because it's not over.
Wow. That's powerful. Thank you. And Pastor, can you share again the resources? I know they wrote it in the chat, but just so that people can hear what your company is called, the different resources, just so people can just hear it again from you.
Absolutely. So if you desire a counseling session, emotional support, a counselor that kind of help you navigate through your feelings, you can definitely go to my website, which is robertaferrer.com. That's robertaferrer.com, or you can find me on Facebook or Instagram, Robert Ferrer LLC. And for those of you that may be in a crisis or you just need some emotional support, there is a free service. It's NewYorkProjectHope.org. If you go to that service, you can find ways to get to a crisis counselor so that you could talk to somebody, because we all can use emotional support at some time or another in our life. And maybe if you need more care, they can refer you to that. But don't be worried, because it's confidential, it's free, and it's anonymous. So go ahead and go to New York, NY, projecthope.org and see if you can get some help there.
Wow, listen, we want to thank Pastor Robert Farrell for joining us tonight. This has been, I love having shows where we can really, there's a takeaway. And the takeaway is that you have brought hope to people that are listening. Like I said, Shalana literally wrote in the chat, you are speaking her life. People have chimed in. And we want to thank you, Pastor, for what you're doing for the kingdom. It's so important. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And also letting people understand that, just like you said, some things, it's normal. And they don't have to condemn themselves or feel like, you know, they're the worst person in the world. But let people know there is hope and that they can get through it and that they're not alone. And that's the part that means so much to some people. Just understand that you're not alone. We want to thank Pastor Robert for joining us tonight on Real Talk. Again, another wonderful session about talking about something that's real and what people are going through. We want you to like us on Facebook, like us on YouTube, and listen, people are still chiming in on our shirts. I have orders that we're going to be filling. Wow. We want you to be able to get one of our signature shirts that talks about Real Talk and what we do here. One of the messages of the takeaway for Real Talk is that we always want people to know that our message is bringing to you what's really going on. Look, our shirt says being real is our power. And that's what Real Talk is all about. Thank you again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing everybody every Wednesday at 6:30. And also remember, on the Inspired Living Network, this same segment that you're seeing right now is going to be featured. So you want to go watch it there too. So grateful for you joining us tonight. Thank you again, Pastor Robert, for being a guest.
Thanks for having me.
We invite you to come back again and join us. Listen to my audience. I'll see you guys next week on Real Talk with Jean Price. Good night.
There's a large stigma around mental health in all communities, and particularly in communities of color and African American communities. Most people still go to their religious leader before they go to doctors, sometimes because they still don't trust medical establishments. There are all types of mottos in Black religious teachings that suggest that mental health challenges are different than any other kind of physical challenges, and we should be able to get over it by ourselves, when no one thinks they'll just get over diabetes or heart disease by themselves. We do such a good job of being community for each other and lifting each other up. And if religious leaders were better trained in addressing mental health challenges and talking about self-care, maybe more Black people would feel safe talking about it.